husband and I went to Palestine at the end of October, hoping to go to a mental health conference in Gaza. And the conference was called Mental Health and the Effects of Siege, because Gaza has been under siege for a year and a half now, with limited supplies coming in and the level of chronic malnutrition going up. This is the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, sort of the iconic photo of Jerusalem. Just to give you a little background, the population of the West Bank is 2.6 million, with a land area about the size of Vermont. Those living in the West Bank refugee camps are 490,000. Those are refugee camps established when Israel was formed, and people are continuing to live with them, many with the hope that they will eventually be able to reclaim the land that was lost in 1948. The population of Gaza is 1.5 million, with a land area about 2 times the size of Washington, D.C., and those living in Gaza refugee camps, about a third of the population. About 5.5 million Palestinians live in the diaspora, and they do not have the right of return. Israel, gives Israelis the right of return from anywhere in the world, but Palestinians do not have that right. So this conference that was to be held in Gaza was sponsored by the World Health Organization, which had assured us that we would definitely get into Gaza and be able to visit our friends there. And it had been 3 years since my husband and I had been in, so we were eager to go and visit the people that we know there on the ground. And just at the last minute, the Israeli Defense Force said, no, we couldn't come in. So these are some of the international mental health professionals protesting outside Erez checkpoint that we were not able to get in. This particular segment of the wall, which exists now between Israel and Palestine inside the Green Line, which is established in 1967, as you can see, runs right down the middle of a street. This is showing, yeah. These people are shopkeepers who have gone out of business, because right over on this side of the wall is a place called Rachel's Tomb, which is a holy place. And so the wall went up, completely surrounds a whole large segment of this side of Bethlehem, and has caused real problems for the Palestinians who live there. Throughout the West Bank and around Gaza, there are these checkpoint barriers. The United Nations says that there are almost approaching 600 of those permanent barriers, and then there are also what's called a flying checkpoint. Flying checkpoint means that you might be traveling along in your car on a Palestinian road, and an Israeli jeep will pull up in front of you and start stopping traffic. 2 years ago, I was in the West Bank heading for a Nablus, and in a van that had about 6 of us in it, and there was a flying checkpoint right in front of us, and there was a young Palestinian man kneeling on his knees in the middle of the dirt on this road that we were going on, and the guy that was driving our car pulled up to the head of the line, and the Israeli jeep occupants lifted their machine guns and pointed them like this at us, and one pointed right at me, and I thought, I'm an old lady. I just went like that to him, and he thankfully lowered his gun, and then eventually let this young man go that was kneeling on the ground. But it's humiliating, it's degrading, it's disempowering. It's a terrible thing to see human beings treated in such a way. This is that original butterfly pattern, and inside, I don't know if you can see this, here's the original Green Line. It comes here, and the wall, this is the wall that is being built throughout, skirts inside the Green Line in some very significant places. And up here in Qalqilia, the wall, I think you can probably see this, forms kind of a keyhole, and there's one gate, one entrance exit into Qalqilia, and it's open 15 minutes a day when things go well. Also, here in the West Bank, there are hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers living on West Bank land land that is technically occupied land against international law. And those settlers consume twice as much water, use twice as much water as the Israelis use. And the Israelis use, I think it's almost 3 times as much water as the Palestinians use. I maybe have that on a slide in a minute. Water has become the new oil for this part of the country, this part of the world, because water is becoming more and more scarce and more of a critical commodity. Here's Gaza over there on the edge with its checkpoints. The primary one is here at Eretz, where I showed you that demonstration. And Gaza has been effectively closed now since Hamas took over. This is all information about the checkpoints, but to show you what this means for the Palestinians living in Gaza, this is the number of truckloads of material that were going in. Here, in December of 2005, 13,000 truckloads went into Gaza per month. That fell in May of 2007 when Hamas was threatening. In February of 2008, after Hamas took over, the number of truckloads was almost down to nothing, then rose up just a little bit like this, and then again from November 4th to the 17th of this year, just this month, there were no trucks allowed at all. Well, because the UNRWA feeds half the population of Gaza, they report that 4 or 5 times in the last year they've almost run out of food. Between the 4th and the 17th of this month, they completely ran out of food. So half the population of Gaza had no incoming food. They have a very high level of unemployment. So even from open markets, people have a hard time buying food if there's food available, if it ever comes in. Their water and treatment of sewage is a terrible problem, because when no fuel gets in, the sewage treatment plants can't run. So the sewage can't be treated, and raw sewage is dumped into the Mediterranean and enters into the water aquifer. And the water aquifer, which is already bad and is already contaminated with salt coming in from the sea because it's been overpumped, because the population exceeds the capacity of the aquifer, now becomes contaminated with E. coli, with bacteria from the gut. So the level of waterborne disease is beginning to rise also in Gaza. This is a humanitarian crisis going on this very day, and the world pretty much doesn't know about it. In the West Bank, because I couldn't show you a picture of Gaza, almost all houses have these tanks on top of the roof. Some of them are pretty shoddy looking, but this is just on the outside of Bethlehem. These tanks are water storage tanks. The family that I'm related to in Bethlehem, I'm the godmother of 2 Palestinian boys in Bethlehem, and this family tells me that they get water sporadically throughout the year. They fill their tank, and if the water shortage goes on or the water turnoff goes on for more than a week, then they typically will run out of water. That means no water to drink, no water to cook with, no water to flush the toilets with, no water to shower with, no water. Israel controls the water coming into Bethlehem. Israel controls most of the water coming all over the West Bank. The World Health Organization calls for us to have 100 liters of water per capita per day, and that means for agriculture as well as consumption directly. Palestinians consume 50 to 70 on average at about 2 to 3 times the price per liter as the Israelis pay. Israel typically consumes 400 liters per day, and the settlers 800 liters per day. I'm almost done, then we can talk. Physicians for Human Rights this month says that in the last year, 200 patients died waiting for permits to cross from Gaza to Israel for medical care. The coordinator for Palestinian NGO Network says this siege isn't about security or Hamas. Israel's ultimate aim is to separate Gaza from the West Bank and kill the Palestinian National Project. Spokesman for UNRWA says what we need is proper, consistent, long-term, and large-scale access. Without that, UNRWA is operating with its hands tied behind its back. And Jonathan Cook, a writer who lives in northern Palestine, says all of the moves have one purpose: persuading the world that Israel's occupation of Gaza is over, and Israel can therefore ignore the laws of occupation and use unremitting force against Gaza. In January of this year, Hamas led the opening of the border between Rafah and Egypt, the southern border of Gaza. And hundreds of thousands of Palestinians over a several days period went into Egypt and got material and brought it back. Brought back food, brought back bread, brought back maybe some weapons. And then that border was sealed with the understanding that Egypt would make a deal with Hamas and Israel for a permanent kind of opening on a regular basis. That has not happened. Hamas is still in conflict with Fatah, the people who run the West Bank, and until that conflict ends, there really isn't much hope that there's going to be a deal between Hamas and Israel and Egypt. So in the meantime, UNRWA says, the United Nations says, that they think that there's somewhere between 400 and 600 tunnels that have been dug in under the border. And those tunnels collapse and people get hurt and they're very unsafe, and to say nothing of the discouragement and humiliation and the horror of them. And then I think, this is a U.S. slide again, as the first one was about Iraq, but I think that it behooves us to know where our money is going. And Israel is the sixth wealthiest nation on earth and the largest overall recipient of U.S. aid. Between 1949 and 2006, Israel received more than $156 billion of direct U.S. aid. That's not aid for military, that's direct U.S. aid. And it doesn't count loan guarantees that have been forgiven. In 2005, the United States gave Israel more than $2.6 billion, while the occupied Palestinian territories received $348.2 million. 1974 to 2003, Israel benefited from more than $45 billion in waived loan guarantees from the U.S. Between 1996 and 2006, Israel received $24 billion in financial military aid from the U.S. And now, in August of 2007, a new MOU says that we will give from the United States to Israel $30 billion in military aid. I hope you can see this. Yes, you can. And so in the midst of all of this, one of the things that concerned me most of all in our visit to Palestine this year was how normalized this horrible treatment has become. The last night that we were in our hotel in Bethlehem, a military vehicle with lots of armed men pulled up in front of our hotel and blocked the road to our hotel. Got out, apprehended a couple of young Palestinians, strip searched them in front of us so that they had to pull their shirts up. They were humiliated, they were disgraced, and I said, and at the same time they were setting off sound bombs. Sound bombs are hard to describe. It's almost as though a huge bomb has exploded in front of you. The walls shake. It's very fearful atmosphere. And I said to the fellow behind the desk at our hotel, how do you stand this? How can you even cope with this horrible noise, this horrible shaking, and the fact that your hotel is now effectively closed by that military vehicle out in front? And he said, oh, this is normal for us. And I said, and that worries me most of all, that this is normal for you. That this has become so routine that you just shrug your shoulders. So this was right outside that hotel. On the pillar, wall art is all over this wall throughout Palestine. On the Palestinian side, I don't know about the Israeli side, it says, instead of no hope, it says KNOW, hope, which I thought was pretty nice. These are those Palestinians I told you were encamped on the border of Jordan. This is wall art, which I thought was particularly poignant. And this is my favorite quote by Howard Zinn. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act, in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now, as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. And so, you know, this week when I was talking to kids at the global health class at the University of Washington, I said to them, do one thing every day. You know, write to your congressman. Send some money to the Gaza Community Mental Health Project. Even if it's $5, give up your latte today and send that money to help some Israeli person who wants to help a Palestinian person, because there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis who are working on this. There are hundreds of thousands of Israelis who want peace with the Palestinians. And you're going to have Jeff Halper here in January to talk. And this guy is the head of the Israeli Committee Against Housing Demolitions. Come and hear him. He's fantastic. And the work he's done is just spectacular. The Free Gaza movement, where the boats have come from Cyprus into the shores of Gaza, Jeff Halper was on one of those boats and was arrested by Israel when he went back through Eretz. So here's an Israeli hero, somebody who's doing something every single day of his life to help. And I think it behooves every single one of us, and so I have this last slide, which says, from Raja Jihadi, we don't need spectators to witness our suffering and tell us they feel with us. We need help to put a stop to it. And that's the truth. So I thank you all for listening so patiently to me, and I'd love to enter into discussion.